right, ladies and gentlemen, you asked, I deliver. Right here, we have the 10 millimeter Sbd Belt. Dax, if you want to get a couple more close-ups of this bad boy. So, one of the main differences is this buckle's a little bit more rounded compared to the other one. And obviously, it's 10 millimeters compared to the thickness of a 13 millimeter. You can obviously see it's a little bit thinner. So, I'm sure you guys have already seen plenty of videos on this, so I kind of want to keep this quick. But this is the main reason why I think that the 10 millimeter could potentially be worth your money. And what it comes down to is deadlifts. If you are a conventional deadlifter, you are very, very likely going to benefit from a 10 millimeter belt. I specifically prefer the Sbd because I've been training in an Sbd belt since 2019, and it's just, anything else just doesn't feel good. It just has to be Sbd. Reason being is when, this can go for sumo guys too, but especially bigger conventional pullers like myself, when I go to hinge down to the bar, when I go to pick it up in my 13 millimeter, that belt is so thick around my waist that what ends up happening is I hinge down, the buckle hits my thighs and creates a little bit of discomfort, and I feel like I'm sacrificing a little bit of positioning when I do that. Now, that might not actually be the case, but with a 10 millimeter, specifically the Sbd 10 millimeter, I feel like I'm not sacrificing that position because it's thin enough that I can actually wedge. I feel like I can wedge into the bar more. Sumo pullers might be able to feel this too. A lot of people are switching to a 10 millimeter because of this. You're able to improve your deadlift positioning. But what I like about the 10 millimeter Sbd compared to other 10 millimeter belts is the 10 millimeter Sbd belt is it's still very, very rigid. It's not like a flimsy belt like some of the other 10 millimeters that I've used. Some people prefer that, I don't. What I like about this belt is when I put this on, it feels extremely rigid like my 13 millimeter, but I'm not sacrificing my positioning in my deadlifts. For the average Joe that might wanna, they're getting into powerlifting, they wanna get a belt and they can't decide between the 13 or the 10. Honestly, I'm gonna say I would get the 10 before I got the 13. Because although I do still prefer my 13 millimeter for squat, I think that the average person is going to have a more enjoyable experience in a 10 millimeter. So with that being said, this belt sells for the same price as a 13 millimeter. So I mean, if you just take a look around my garage, I got 3 Sbd belts here. 1, 2, 3. So, 4 if you include Dax's. So that's $1,200 in lifting belts, which sounds pretty ridiculous. And it is kind of ridiculous, but this is a hobby and I can afford my hobby and I like making these videos and I like making reviews. So my final say is this. If you are a bigger lifter, like myself, I compete at 110 kilos, 242 pounds. You are likely going to want to keep a 13 millimeter belt to squat in. Because you are bigger, you can probably handle a bigger belt. But for deadlifts, if you're a heavier guy like me, you probably already have a little bit of a belly. Maybe you don't, but regardless, you are a thick person. And a 10 millimeter is probably going to benefit your deadlift positioning, especially if you are a conventional puller. Now, if you are a smaller lifter, I still think that a 10 millimeter is really going to benefit you because the 13 millimeter belts are extremely thick and bulky, which can be really uncomfortable for a smaller lifter to wear. It kind of eats up your hips. In fact, I have like literally permanent bruising around my hip here from my 13 millimeter belt. I've had these bruises around my waist since I began powerlifting in 2019. They have never gone away. The smaller you are, the more uncomfortable it may be to wear a thicker belt. Ultimately, you're just gonna have to try, you're gonna have to try things, you're gonna have to see what works for you. But for the general population, I'm gonna say that I would probably go with a 10 millimeter before I went with a 13. So if you're on a budget, you don't wanna spend $600 on 2 SBD belts, but you really wanna get an SBD belt, and you fit in the categories that I'm explaining, I would probably go with a 10. My friend Jace, he competes at 181. He had a 13, he bought the 10. He uses it to squat and deadlift. He thinks it feels way better. Shout out to Jace. His opinions are similar to mine. He really likes the thinner style of belt, and it's less uncomfortable to wear because although it maintains some of its rigidity, the lack of thickness just makes it a far more comfortable belt to wear. One more thing I want to touch on when it comes to these is another issue that you might run into that I actually ran into when I wore my A7 belt that had the adjustable lever that Pioneer made, is other belts, and why I don't prefer other lever belts, have a really thick prong. And what I mean by that is you can see how low profile and thin this buckle is. I'll show you the 13 as well. When it's latched up, that's a pretty thin and low profile buckle prong. With my A7 belt, the issue I was having is that prong was too thick and it stuck out too much, and when I would squat down, that buckle would actually hit my inner thigh here when I hit the hole, and it would cause like bruising on my thigh, and it would also cause a slight hip shift when I squatted because I was trying to compensate for that discomfort. So going back to the 10 millimeter, some squatters, personally in an SBD belt, I do not have this issue, but I know that some people do. The thickness of a 13 millimeter belt might be too thick, and it might cause what I'm explaining, where the buckle hits your thigh, it creates some discomfort, and so you shift your hips a little bit to compensate for that. Where a 10 millimeter, you're likely not going to have this issue because of how slim this buckle is combined with the thinner belt. You're likely not going to have any issues with that. So all around, I think this was a long time coming. I think SBD should have made this sooner. I don't love that it's $300, but I bought it anyway, and so did everybody else that has one, so I'm sure SBD doesn't really care. But for the general public, the general population, the average lifter, I would definitely go for a 10 millimeter before I went for a 13. For all the reasons that I already explained. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can DM me on Instagram at Tyler_110kg. Make sure you follow Elevation Powerlifting. That's where we post all of our educational content and our coaching content. And I will catch you guys in the next video.